Hi, everyone. Good
Hello.
afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. It's the last in our series, which is Rise Above the Downturn. The title of today's session is Think Up in a Down Economy. It is led by Dan Rust, who is the Vice President of Leadership and Commercial Practice at Infopro Learning. Welcome, everyone, and over to you, and then.
Excellent. By my clock, Somnath, we have one more minute before we
All right.
start. So my commitment to everyone will be we'll start exactly on time and we will end exactly on time, if not 1 or 2 minutes early, just to accommodate everybody's schedules.
Sure.
And now by my clock, we are right at the bottom of the hour. So welcome, everyone, to Think Up in a Down Economy. Let me first start by introducing myself briefly, and then we're going to roll up our sleeves and jump right into the content of this program. I'm Dan Rust, Vice President of Leadership and Commercial Development for Infopro Learning. I am host of the Leadership Disrupted podcast, which is available on Spotify. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, really anywhere where you consume podcasts. If you are a podcast consumer, you can find Leadership Disrupted. Also, the author of Workplace Poker, which is a book focused on navigating the interpersonal dynamics within the workplace. It also focuses on self-promotion, career acceleration, etc. And I only share those things with you because I do think it impacts a session like this, where we're focused on getting your head right in response to the economic circumstances that are surrounding us. You'll also see on the screen a QR code. If you take a photo of that QR code with your phone, it'll take you to my contact information. So you can do that if you want to. Obviously, not mandatory. So, how to think up in a down economy, and we're going to start with an acknowledgement that I'm not necessarily the best person to be facilitating this session because I'm not an optimist. My nature is pretty cynical. My nature is pretty I'll call it realistic, but it's more than realistic. It borders on cynicism. And um, as we focus in on thinking up in a down economy, and as I've been building out this content for this program, I've had to actually work against my own nature. And you'll see that reflected in the content that's coming up. Just before we dive in, I have to mention a couple of more things. This is sort of me singing for my supper, so to speak. In my role working for Infopro Learning, I head up a team that has developed all of the courses that you see on the screen here and also on the next slide. You can see highlighted is a course called Lead Up in a Down Economy. This is the full program is a series of virtual instructor-led trainings or a one-day on-site program. So it's a full 6.5 to 7 hours of content. And what I've done for the purpose of this webinar is I've curated or sampled content from the full program. But I did want you to know that the full program is available. This is part one of our library of content. This is part two of our library of content. And you can see we even have a program called Sell Up in a Down Economy, which is designed to help salespeople not just change their mindset, but actually develop specific habits and practices that will help them become more successful during tough economic times. So we're going to make this handout available to you. And in fact, what I want to do in the chat is I want to upload a participant guide. It's not the PowerPoint deck. It is just a participant guide that can help you track along with our content, take notes if you want to. Uh, so if you look in the chat, you'll see you can download this participant guide. And if you want to open it up, you'll see there are areas to take notes if you want to take notes. But a lot of the key concepts are highlighted within the participant guide. So it'll make it easier for you to track with the content as it flows. So a down economy. Some of you on this call may be already experiencing a tough economy. Some of you may be hearing the rumblings in the distance, like it's not necessarily on you right now, but you can get a sense that the economy may be not going so well in the near future. Um, we know that we're not in a situation where everyone acknowledges we're in the midst of a deep recession. This is not 2008, 2009, where we're all there and we all acknowledge. Now, it could be pre-2008, pre-2009, we just don't know. And part of that uncertainty, as we look into the future, it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If 60% of businesses stop spending money or they slow down their budgets or their spend because of concerns about the future, that slowdown actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We all would like to be able to predict the future. We would all like to look into our crystal balls and say, well, third quarter is going to be this, and then fourth quarter, and then the first quarter of 2006, and then we'll build our plans based upon that. Even when, perhaps even especially when, we all think that we know what the future holds. For example, right now, most of us, if you're paying attention to this, most of us assume that the Fed is going to reduce interest rates in September. It's a broad-based market assumption. So because it's what everyone assumes, everyone's, I'll use in air quotes, everyone has already built that projected drop in interest rates into their assumptions. So it's not as if we wake up one morning in September and then we're all surprised that the Fed has lowered interest rates. The only thing that seems open to debate right now is whether they will lower interest rates by 25 basis points or 50 basis points. And that would be a genuine, I think, uncertainty. But the point I want to make is that when everyone starts to assume a certain thing about the future, that thing actually creates behaviors that can become problematic. Take 2008 again. I'm going to go back to 2008. There was a point in 2008 where if you ask any economist about housing prices, almost any and every economist would have said, well, housing prices, they never go down. Sometimes they flatline. They might flatline for a year or two, but even in the midst of a recession, they never go down. Well, that broad-based assumption drove behaviors that ended up causing that assumption to be dramatically wrong. You had people making decisions about housing purchases and housing loans that ultimately became very, very problematic and created the 2008, 2009 economic crisis, the housing mortgage crisis. The same is true in the early 2000s. Some of you are old enough to remember this, that in the early 2000s, graduating college students or college students who were thinking about their major, what they want to major in, one of the common things they heard from guidance counselors was, hey, if you want stability, if you want something that's a for sure career path, go into law, because we're never going to have an overabundance of lawyers. Well, what happened? Tens of thousands of students went into law, and we actually ended up 10 years later with a glut of lawyers. And if there are any lawyers on this call, I mean, I'm no disrespect intended, but we ended up with a glut of lawyers. And then you fast forward another 10 years, and many organizations began leveraging technology, leveraging other tools to reduce their legal spend. So because of this broad-based assumption of what the future would hold, what drove certain behaviors, those behaviors themselves became problematic. That's why, and go back in the past 10 to 15 years earlier, the same thing happened with MBAs. There was a point at which students entering college would often be told, hey, get your MBA. An MBA is your ticket. It's your ticket to success in the business world. I'm not saying an MBA is a bad thing, but we did reach a point where there was a glut of MBAs, and then having an MBA meant a lot less than it used to mean. So my point here is that as we look into the future, as we think that we can see the future, if what we think we're seeing is very similar to what other people are seeing, so you want to step back and be a little critical in your thinking, be a little discerning in your thinking, because looking into the future and seeing what everyone else is seeing already, there's not much value in that. The value is in looking into the future and potentially seeing something that not everyone sees, that only a few people see. And so we're going to apply, as I said at the very beginning, I'm not a natural optimist. In fact, I am very much a natural cynic. And so in thinking about the future and what to do about the future, particularly if there is economic uncertainty, I'm going to apply what we call integrated thinking. And what we mean by integrated thinking is this interesting combination of strategic thinking, critical thinking, and systems thinking that can happen all at the same time. It can happen in sequence. And one of the things I've noticed, because over the last 20 years, I have worked with hundreds upon hundreds of leaders at high levels within organizations. I've worked with many more leaders at the mid-level and entry level. But having worked, either in small ways or big ways with hundreds, perhaps thousands of leaders, and been able to observe hundreds of them in action, one of the unique distinctions I've seen with the very best leaders is their ability to apply this, what I call integrated thinking, meaning they think strategically, critically, and systemically almost all at the same time. And I'm going to unpack this. I will unpack this for you as part of this. So we will, because we're going to crawl before we walk, and we're going to walk before we fly. So I'm going to unpack what I mean by integrated thinking, and we are then going to apply it to thinking about the future, thinking about tough economic circumstances. Now, I understand that many of you, or each of you, is coming from a different place. So that title, think up in a down economy, it might appeal to you if you're worried about your job. It might appeal to you if you just lost your job. But it might appeal to you if you're running a business or a division or a department and you're worried about revenue the next quarter, or you're worried about something else coming up in the not too distant future. So this the focus that I'm having for this session incorporates all of that. So whether you're focused on your individual career or growth path, or your individual track at work, whether you're focused on an organization, or if maybe you're focused on all of that, I'm going to apply the content to all of those things. So let's start, as we unpack integrated thinking, let's start with strategic thinking. And one aspect of strategic thinking is about differentiation, is about, when we said at the beginning, if everyone is zigging, perhaps you should at least consider zagging as you look into your personal crystal ball and you say to yourself, well, I think interest rates are going to drop in September. And why do I think that? Well, that's what everyone's saying. So it's still okay to acknowledge that it's likely that interest rates will drop at least 25 basis points in September. But it's also important to acknowledge that that's what everyone's thinking. That's what everyone's planning for. So then you ask yourself, all right, that's the zig. Is there a zag? Is there something else? Is there something in addition? Is there a way for my thinking to go a bit deeper than that thinking? So we want to be something more than just lemmings. For those of you who understand I guess, who understand lemmings. Now lemmings are misunderstood creatures. They look like, cute little rodents. There is a rumor, or some people make the assumptions that lemmings are creatures that commit suicide when there's an overpopulation. It's actually not true. There's been a lot of research on lemmings. What actually happens is lemmings tend to follow whoever's in front of them. They tend to follow the crowd. So if there is a heightened population of lemmings, or if a group of lemmings is looking to move toward a food source, lemmings will, almost like sheep, they will just follow each other. And that's why I'm using lemmings as the visual here, because what we want to do is make sure that we are not being lemmings, that we aren't just following the crowd. Um, and how do you not follow the crowd? You first of all understand that what you are thinking of doing, or you understand crowd-like behavior. Um, and that doesn't mean that there isn't wisdom in crowds. There is wisdom in crowds. Oftentimes, when you look at what crowds think of a movie, you look at Rotten Tomatoes. I oftentimes count on Rotten Tomatoes reviews to tell me what's the value of this movie. Is it likely to be something that will entertain me? And I tend to pay more attention to the not the professional critics, but just to the average viewers, the actual viewers. So that while there is some value in the thinking of crowds, there's also value in differentiation. And so I'm going to ask you whether you're focusing on your career, focusing on your LinkedIn profile, focusing on your business, your department, focusing on your life in general, just ask yourself, in what ways may I have unintentionally been a bit of a lemming where I'm doing what others do because that seems to make sense at least. But and I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but if everyone's doing it, sometimes that behavior where everyone, like, let's take LinkedIn profiles, for example. There is a commonly accepted wisdom regarding how to have a good professional LinkedIn profile. I'm not saying any of that is wrong, but if you are looking to be noticed, if you are looking to be a bit uh, different, if you, whatever your strategy is, whatever your intent is, you might want to ask yourself, okay, how do I be different in ways that are still professional, in ways that are still acceptable, but noticeably different so that I step out of the crowd. The same is true with let's take a bigger business approach. If you are struggling with revenue, maybe your sales are down, or maybe your margins are down because you're having to lower prices or negotiate with customers in order to keep your volume up. And you're looking at the behavior of your competitors. If all of your competitors are zigging, I'm not saying you shouldn't zig because I don't know your situation well enough, but you should at least ask the question, is there any strategic benefit to zagging? What might we want to do differently than our competitors? What are the potential benefits? So whatever your economic focus is, whether you're positioning your company to survive, whether you're positioning your career to do the same, maybe you've been laid off and your focus is on getting a new job. Maybe you're missing revenue targets and you're trying to figure out how do we, achieve those revenue targets. The first strategic thinking to apply is strategic thinking around differentiation. Because if we follow the same path that everyone else is following, it'll feel safe. It'll feel like, well, this is what makes sense because I have 5 competitors that are doing this. So if all of your competitors are discounting by 25%, you're going to feel this urge, like I have to discount. And I'm not saying you should or should not discount. I'm saying just because this is, didn't your mother tell you this when you're going, just because they jumped off a bridge, does that mean you need to jump off the bridge? The same is true here. Your mother was right. Now, you may ultimately strategically decide to do a bridge jump, but my guidance to you is to pause and reflect and ask yourself, is there any value in strategic differentiation? The second area of strategic thinking is about the world of abundance that we live in. It's easy to get caught up and think, well, the economy is tight. Customers aren't spending what they used to spend. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking about a world of diminishing resources. But in fact, I'm not saying this is easy, but the truth is, there's plenty of money. If you're looking to do something, whatever you might be looking to do, there is so much money in the world. Now, getting access to it, you might have to be innovative and creative, but there's so much money flowing around us. No matter what anyone tells you, there's so much money. But it's not just money. There's so much talent. There are so many resources. There are so many ideas. We live in a world of huge abundance. tapping into that abundance may require a bit of thinking, a bit of creativity, a little bit of innovation, but don't let yourself get caught up in that sense of, oh, well, customers just aren't buying. Customers are buying. They're buying what they need. They have money for what they need. They have money for what's critical and important to them. Or again, just remind yourself, we actually, if you live in the Western world, and by the Western world, I mean the US, the UK, Europe in general, Australia, many parts of Asia, there is a very abundant world right now with plenty of resources. And I would start with, if your strategic thinking starts from there, then you'll start to figure out how to access those resources. But if your strategic thinking starts with, well, people just aren't spending, or people aren't buying, or people aren't making decisions, I mean, again, just think about your own thinking and don't let yourself get too limited in your thinking, if that makes sense. I'm going to move on to the other area of strategic thinking, which is about our world of connections. Think about this for a moment. Your I'm going to say, I'll go to two focuses. Your career is in trouble or your business is in trouble. Let's just go to those two extremes. In both cases, think about this for a moment. We live in a world where there are tons of jobs. There just are. Are they competitive? Yes, but there are tons. We live in a world where while remote work may not be as prevalent as it used to be, there are plenty of remote job opportunities. Maybe you're in a situation where your current career, maybe there aren't a lot of jobs. I might push back against that because I think there are a lot of jobs in every career area. And maybe you're finding that you need to think about upskilling. If you need to upskill yourself, again, we live in a world of abundance where there is so much information available. You could today, if you were to take the next 30 days and say, by October 1st, I'm going to be an AI guru. You could do it. There is so much. Yes, AI is, you can go very deep and very broad, and AI can be very challenging to learn. But there are so many AI tools. There are so many free AI courses. You could be an AI marketing guru. You could be an AI sales guru. You could be an AI guru of some kind. You could be in the business of training others to understand and leverage AI. Again, not advocating that path. I'm just saying, from the career standpoint, we live in a world of abundant information, abundant training, abundant upskill opportunities, and abundant connections through LinkedIn. Many of us, I'm old enough to remember when LinkedIn didn't exist, and I kept all of my connections in. It wasn't exactly a Rolodex, but it was like a Rolodex. And for the most part, when you left a job, you left a job and then you moved on, but you didn't necessarily stay connected with the people from your past jobs. Now we live in a world where people do stay connected, and LinkedIn and other social media make it much easier to stay connected. Um, there are so many resources, again, for with human, not just human connections, but technology connections, tool connections. So if you open up your strategic thinking, whatever business problem you're focusing on, and ask yourself, is there a way to think about differentiation, abundance, and connection, and cause me to see things I might not see right away? If I think a little more deeply about differentiation, abundance, and connection, what might bubble up for me? I'm going to just pause for a second to see if there are any questions. I'm famous for getting caught up in the excitement of the content and then forgetting to check. Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any comments or questions. Fine, so I will move on. Um, so we talked about strategic thinking, and I know I'm covering a lot of ground very quickly, but this is sort of the nature of one-way communication in these webinars. But you'll see if you look at the participant guide, all of these points are shared there. So let's move into critical thinking. Now, as I said, the best leaders that I've seen manage to integrate strategic, critical, and systems thinking almost all at once, and I'm somewhat breaking them apart. But leveraging critical thinking. Um, this is where we shift from scanning the big picture horizon to diving in and examining our assumptions. Because when you say to yourself, well, our customers are doing this, or our customers are this, or our employees are this, or our business is this, or our market is this, we all have to make assumptions in order to operate. But critical thinking is a great tool for questioning those assumptions, asking yourself, is that true or is that a convenient assumption, because it either makes sense of the data that's in front of me or it's a comfortable assumption? But one of my favorite quotes, it goes something like this. In fact, I wrote it down. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. Uh, which is a great quote. I mean, I like it. But the reality, if you're a critical thinking or a critical thinker, it's not just you can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. You can also question the assumptions. You can get out of the ocean and onto the beach. You can dive deeper under the water. You can kite surf and skim over the top of the beach. So the purpose of critical thinking in challenging assumptions is to say you don't just assume the implied world. So when someone says, "Hey, you can't change the waves, but you can surf them," that's fine. Yes, that's all. You can choose to surf the waves of economic disruption, or you can completely change the environment that you are competing in or working in. Um, but I think when there are times of economic uncertainty, we tend to cling to our assumptions because there's a bit of safety in that, particularly if everyone is sharing the same assumptions. So we assume um, our career path is X, whatever that might be. We assume the business environment is X, whatever that might be. We assume what other people assume around us. And I would just ask you just to think a bit more clearly about any assumptions that you're making. And we have a tool that you can use. We're going to get to that very shortly. We have a tool that you can use to help you think about those assumptions, question them, unpack them, maybe rethink, reframe your assumptions. And we'll get to that tool in just a moment. But another aspect of critical thinking has to do with what I call functional optimism or realistic optimism. Um, there's a book by Martin Seligman called Learned Optimism. And if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. Learned Optimism, Martin Seligman. I probably should have put a photo of his book up. It's a great book, but I can boil it down into about 30 seconds. There's a huge body of research that differentiates between practical optimists and cynics. And the research tells us a couple of things. Number one tells us that practical optimists tend to look at the world, and when something bad happens, um, they make three. They have three interpretations of bad things that happen. The bad thing is not permanent; it's temporary. The bad thing is not pervasive. In other words, just because something happened to me or to a small group of people, it doesn't mean it's happening to the world. It's not pervasive and it's not personal. It's not personal attacking me. It's actually impersonal. It's happening for impersonal reasons. So when something bad happens and someone decides, oh, this is permanent because our company experienced layoffs, this economic landscape that's being created is going to last forever or for a very, very long time. Permanent, personal, pervasive. Assuming that negative things that happen are permanent, personal, and pervasive actually shifts you into a very negative, cynical mindset. And your mind does not, thank you, Somnath, for sharing the link to Learned Optimism. Your mind stops searching for solutions because it's permanent. It's pervasive. It's affecting everyone or everything, and it's personal, meaning taking it very personally. It's attacking me. It's targeting me. Whereas taking the opposite approach, it's temporary, It's not pervasive. It's confined to the very specific circumstance or the well-defined circumstance, and it's not personal. It's in fact impersonal. That type of thinking not only leads to a more optimistic outlook, but it actually leads to more action and more realistic action on the part of the individual. So now I've just taken a great book and I've bastardized it by trying to summarize it into 1 or 2 minutes. But there is a science to thinking up. There is a science to paying attention to how am I interpreting this set of circumstances? Is this set of circumstances in fact permanent? Is that set of circumstances in fact pervasive? Are the circumstances in fact personal? Was I personally targeted, or is there some reason this is happening to me personally? And I think sometimes when you just ask yourself those questions, and do it in a systemic way, that's a way of critically thinking about the things that have happened to you and leading you toward a more not just optimistic mindset, but a more functional mindset where you are, in fact, um, more likely to take action, more likely to brainstorm solutions, more likely to to do something and then learn from whatever it is that you do, as opposed to closing down. Hopefully, you're tracking with my logic. One final point about critical thinking is there are three mindset shifts that I recommend or that I have found to be useful. And as I said at the very beginning, none of these don't come naturally to me. I am by nature a cynic. I'm by nature an engineer. My formal education is in nuclear engineering. Um, I operate, I believe, with cold logic for the most part. I am not a pie in the sky thinker. Now, that can help me sometimes. It helps me avoid, stepping on metaphorical landmines, so to speak, but it also gets in the way because it stops me from trying. It stops me from experimenting. And sometimes it contributes to me forgetting that sometimes the learning is the biggest objective. Trying an experiment, trying something new, trying something different. If I learn from it, that alone can have great value, even if it didn't produce the specific outcome that I was hoping it would produce. I can't tell you the number of times if I put myself in an optimistic frame of mind, I've tried things and it hasn't worked out. I'm still better off if it hasn't worked out. Or oftentimes, I'm not always, but oftentimes I'm better off because of what I've learned. So the mindset shift number one that I would recommend is to shift from protecting what I have, which is very comfortable during tough economic times, shift from protecting what I have to testing what could work. Low risk tests. Whether you're applying this to investing, to your career, to interviewing for jobs, or new products in the marketplace, new services in the marketplace. However you're thinking about this, shifting from protect the core to safe, low risk tests. Let's try some new things. Now, am I saying you should not protect the core? Of course, you should protect the core, protect what you have, but don't do it at the expense of not experimenting, at the expense of not trying, at the expense of not stepping out into the world with a few new things. So, shift number one, from protect what I have to um, test what could work and learn from it. Test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. Shift number two, shift from that's not going to work because shift to what would need to be true for that to work would be. So I know that's a bunch of words. Let me try it again. So shifting from, oftentimes when we're brainstorming, we're thinking about, hey, I had someone say to me, I knew the moment I graduated from university, I knew I'd made a mistake because I went into this field and I know my heart was in this other field. I just knew it, but I didn't pursue it. And now I'm 10 years on, and 10 years out of school is just not the time to make a career change right now. It just isn't. And here are all the practical reasons why I can't make a career change right now. I have a spouse, I have two children, I have this life that counts on me being able to bring in, revenue into the household. Those were all facts, but the facts led to the conclusion that it just won't work now for me to make a career shift. And I must have asked this person, it was at least three times as we were having the conversation. I said, so what would have to be true in order for it to make sense? What would have to be true for it to make sense? And so the very first thing that came out of their mind was, well, I'd have to be able to make the transition without giving up my current job. I'd have to work my current job and prepare for the next career path. So I said, well, is that possible? Well, yeah, it's possible. Takes a lot of time. It would mean night school. It would mean if you. So we kind of checked that off. And I said, so then what else would have to be true? Well, that new career path, really, it's who you know. You have to have a lot of connections. You have to, and so then I asked, well, what would have to be true for you to gain those connections that you don't have right now? And long story short, we worked our way through this. And by the time we were done, we had identified a path, a difficult path, but a path. And then my final question was, what would have to be true to make this feel not so hard? Because it feels ominous right now. You're looking at a lot of work. What would have to be true for it to feel joyful versus like another chore? And the person stepped back, had to think about this. And ultimately, what this person said was, I would need the support of my partner, like the enthusiastic support of my partner. And I would need to know that it's going to work out. I would need to almost have like an assurance of success. While we couldn't do a lot about that second one, we realized we could do a lot about the first one. And so my point is simply that shift from that's not going to work, and here are the reasons that's not going to work. That's always easy, and I'm the master at that. I can give you lots of reasons why something's not going to work. But shifting to what would have to be true in order for it to work, I think that's an important mindset shift, particularly if you're writing it down and you're journaling. And then finally, the third mindset shift is that's out of my control. It's all out of my control. I don't have control. It's not in my hands. There are forces at play that are external from me. I have no power over those forces. That's not wrong. Objectively, it's correct, I would imagine, in many cases. However, um, shifting from it's all out of my control to what can I control? Even 10% of what can I control within this massive body of things that I can't control? What can I control? And it only may be a couple of little bullet points. Only may be a couple of little things, but focusing in on what you can versus what you cannot. And I know here's where I get uncomfortable because I know I start to sound like a motivational speaker, and that's not my intent. But I do know that logically making that transition from here's why it won't work to what would it take to make it true that it can work, and here's what I can't control to what are those elements that I can control. It can make a huge difference, whether it's in product planning, strategy development, career planning, whatever it might be. There is value in shifting that mindset. Now, here um, is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Um, Oftentimes, there are opportunities that are camouflaged. They're invisible. We have to look a little more deeply in order to see those opportunities. And I'm going to just give you one example, but this is a principle that, man, it impacts all of our lives, or it can impact all of our lives. But seeing the opportunity within the camouflage, um, looking deeper, viewing deeper. And I'm going to just give you one real world example of someone who saw the opportunity within the camouflage and actually made a huge difference. So go back about 17 years from now, 17 to 20 years. Um, Harley Davidson announced that they were going to embark on the development of an electric motorcycle, which ultimately became this motorcycle you see on the screen here. It's called the Livewire. However, the 20-year journey that Harley Davidson went through to develop the Livewire, Harley invested hundreds of millions of dollars. They had virtually unlimited resources. It's Harley Davidson, so they had factories, they had engineers, they had everything one could want. And the team that was assigned to build the Livewire had very few financial limitations. And ultimately, they built a beautiful bike, but when it was first launched, it had some mechanical problems, got some really bad reviews because so much had been invested in the bike itself. The price point for the bike was not comfortable for someone who was used to paying a certain price point for a traditional Harley Davidson. They would have to pay significantly more for a Livewire. So the assumption was um, the traditional Harley customer who loves that rumble of a Harley engine, that he or she would actually pay a premium for a bike that uh, maybe is not as performance oriented, but within and then ultimately Harley pulled the bike from the market um, because it wasn't sustainable because they'd spent so much on it that they had to price it in a way where it just wasn't sustainable in the market. However, what they did end up doing was um, launching a separate company, a separate publicly traded company. They took all of the Livewire financials, transferred them off of Harley's balance sheet into a separate publicly traded company, which was more of a finance move than anything else, and relaunched this product into the marketplace. It's not, let's just say, it's not burning up revenue figures. It's okay, but there's not a huge move of buyers for the Harley Livewire or the Livewire, which now a big percentage of the Livewire company is owned by Harley Davidson. But contrast that with an electric motorcycle called the Luna. And the Luna was invented or built and engineered at around the same time that the Livewire was initially being engineered. But it was engineered, the Luna was engineered by a guy working out of a single motorcycle shop in Brooklyn. And his concept for an electric motorcycle, he understood that he needed to be more that electric operation was only the start of differentiation. He wanted a vehicle, when we talk about having differentiation as part of your strategy, he wanted to be different. So all of the parts of the Luna are built on sustainable materials. The what appears to be leather is actually vegetable-based leather, faux leather. All the parts that are built to be plastic are made out of recycled plastic. Every piece of the Luna is sustainable, but also he had almost no development budget. He had little money, so he reached out to various engineering firms, and he got firms. He had a vision. He had blueprints and plans and designs that he created over time. He got organizations to donate pieces and parts to the point where he ultimately had two operating prototypes. He was able to build two operating prototypes with a total investment of under $50,000. So instead of spending hundreds of millions, he spent under $50,000 to have two working prototypes. And from those two working prototypes, he's able to get some financing and ultimately start manufacturing. And because of the way this whole endeavor started, because his cost of business was so much lower, the price points were more reasonable and the margins were much higher. And so the Luna launched to immediate enthusiasm from electric motorcycle enthusiasts and has continued to grow and grow and grow. And I just find this to be an interesting example of someone who actually made the lack of financial resources into a strategic advantage because, again, of his mindset as opposed to being more of a lemming and following a more traditional approach. So you can look if this story intrigues you, look up Terraform, look up Luna. The Luna story is well known, and you can find more information. In fact, you can actually go to their website. You can buy a Luna today, and it's a great organization. It's a great bike. I don't have one, but it is a great bike from everything that I've read from actual riders of the Luna. Um, and so again, I think it's an example of how a particular mindset, even with tough economic limitations, can actually deliver not only equal success, but greater success than someone who's not constrained by all of those economic disadvantages. If you go to your participant guide, there's a tool in there that I personally have found to be very useful over the years. I call it a mental reframing journal. Now, I'm somewhat of a neurodiverse person, so you may not think the way I think. But what I have found to be helpful is when I have particular limiting thoughts, or if I just have reasons why this project is not going to work because it helps me to write those thoughts down. It helps me to write my logic chain down. And there's something about not verbalizing it, but putting it on paper and then asking myself questions and answering those questions on paper. There's something about the journaling process. I'm sure there's some neuroscience to this where it taps into some element of one's thinking or processing, maybe the more logical part of our brain. I don't know. But I find that I'm much more able to reframe my thinking. And it's not trying to convince myself or trying to be a pie in the sky Pollyanna-ish thinker. It's just that once I see it in print, then I can say, well, is that actually true? Is that statement true, or is it an assumption? Is there a different framing of that statement that could be equally true, possibly more true? What would I have to learn or know to validate which is more true? So you can see in your participant guide, I've got kind of a reframing process, a journaling process. And we don't have time to go through that, but I wrote it out on the participant guide so that if you are someone who uh, feels you might want to do that, um, I would say start with this track. Um, I have found it to be helpful that I have a small journaling book just for reframing. So I can go back now, I think it's 8 years now. I can go back 8 years and I can look at some of my earlier reframes. And there's a certain amount of learning that comes from that where I say, okay, in fact, I can go back more than 8 years because the original reframe was about publishing a book through one of the top five publishers back in I think it was 2015. I wanted to be a book author, and I wanted to publish through like one of the top five publishers, HarperCollins, Simon and Schuster, and the others. And why? Well, I wanted that. The logical reason was um, I wanted the marketing engine behind those big companies. The other reason was the panache, the fanciness, to be a published author through one of the top five business book publishers. But it's really not possible. I was unpublished. I had never. I mean, I was not a well-known speaker, trainer, consultant. I had no platform to speak of at all. And so it's actually the very first reframe in my book or in my journal where I listed all the reasons why it couldn't happen. And then one by one, I began to reframe those reasons and ask myself that question: what would have to be true in order for them to want to talk to me? What would have to be true in order for an agent to want to rep my book? What would have to be true? And step by step, the things that would have to be true as I peeled those apart and I took action on some of them. Um, the skies parted, got an agent. The agent shopped a proposal. The HarperCollins bought the proposal, and it actually, after all of the initial actions were taken, the actual finding of a top five publisher, it was pretty easy. But it only felt easy because of those earlier actions that were taken, the preparation that was taken. So as much as I call myself a cynic, I am very much a fan of reframing. Um, one's thought process. Now, that doesn't mean you give up every cynical thought, because our cynical thoughts also have value. Our cynical thoughts protect us. Our cynical thoughts keep us in control, because I think we all know or have friends who run away with their flights of fancy. And I am not recommending that you run away with your flights of fancy. In fact, I'm not recommending that you give up your cynical thought process. I'm recommending you apply that cynical thought process to your assumptions, and you ask yourself, is it true or is it an assumption? And let me unpack that to see what would have to change in order for the opposite to be true, or something different to be true. So that's that. You've got the reframing journal in your participant guide. Um, so let's talk a bit about thought loops, and mostly what I want to share here, because this thought comes from having had a lot of conversations with people about their assumptions. And this is why I'm a big fan of the journal, because it's so easy in conversations for people to persuade themselves that their current thinking is perfectly fine. Maybe it's my lack of verbal ability to persuade. Maybe it's one of the reasons I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, because I just can't talk people into changing their thinking. So maybe it's me, maybe it's my limitation, but I think it's something about the nature of verbalizing our thoughts. It's so easy for us to reinforce our own thinking, to come up with examples, to come up with metaphors, to push back. And so I have just had experiences where I've had a long conversation with someone, and the one thing that they've agreed to do is to go back and journal their thoughts and write things down and do their own reframing on their own time. And it helps essentially to identify thought loops where you're reinforcing your own thought pattern again and again and again. You're talking yourself in circles. Sometimes writing things down actually ends up breaking some of those thought loops. So that's why, again, I'm a big fan of following that journaling process. Um, we're coming close to the end here. A couple of final thoughts that I want to share with you. Um, you may have closed some doors for your business, for your division, your department, for your team, for yourself. And I would ask you to at least reconsider some of those closed doors. The person who said to me, it's too late in life now to revisit my career choices. It's too late in life to um, move in this direction versus this direction. Um, Asking yourself, is that an actual closed door, or have I closed it because that's what's most comfortable? Um, had someone who had said they'd always wanted to be a doctor, but didn't have the money, didn't have the financial resources in their early years to go to medical school, didn't have the time in their mid years or later years, and now it's just too late. You can't become a doctor at 52. You can't become a doctor at 57. I would beg to differ. Now, it's not easy, and there are no obvious paths, but there are paths. And then you have to decide, is it worth the effort? So whatever doors you may have closed for yourself, I'm not going to say that door should be open, because some doors are closed for a reason. So that's true. Um, I can't tell you the number of times I have tried to learn the guitar. And this goes back 38 years. I have tried to learn the guitar. Every time my brother would play the guitar, I would get inspired and I would go home. Because I had a guitar, I bought myself a guitar. I had one. I was determined I was going to learn to play it. My father played the guitar. My brother played the guitar. I come from a family of not great musicians, but people who played musical instruments. And every time I tried, didn't work. It's a door I've closed for myself, but I still have a really nice acoustic guitar downstairs. And every time I go down, I look at it and I say, I probably could learn, but I think the reason it's not worked out for me is I've not put in the time. And so then I ask myself, do I want to put in the time? And if the answer is no, okay, then that's at least a conscious no. But for a while, I had convinced myself I just don't have it. I don't have the guitar gene. I don't have the. It's just not in me. And at least recognizing, oh no, it's in me. I could do it. In fact, I could probably be a fabulous guitar player if I were to commit and invest the time. But I'm making a conscious choice to not invest the time. So over the course of these last 55 minutes or so, we've talked about integrated thinking, strategic thinking, critical thinking, and then the last thing we're going to discuss is systems thinking. And as a reminder, that what we mean by systems thinking is understanding the connection between where you were, where you are, and where you want to go. Some of us, we play life's chess game as if we arrived at the chessboard and the pieces are where they are, and we're surprised. Oh my goodness. Well, with the pieces like this, I only have these options. We have to remind ourselves that there's an entire set of decisions, an entire set of actions that led to where the chess pieces are on the board right now. That doesn't mean every one of those decisions or actions was right or wrong. I'm just saying the chessboard of our life today is the result of numerous decisions, numerous actions, and some external circumstances. Things do happen to us. So some external circumstances as well. And so being a systems thinker helps you to say, all right, these things led to where I am. Going forward, I can make choices for other moves that will lead me in a different direction or lead me toward other possibilities. So if you have a particular product mix as a business, if you have a certain line of service as a business, you can recognize these things happened to get us to this point where we are in a business. That doesn't mean we're trapped on this particular chessboard. We can continue to make decisions that expand, that move us in a different direction. So our chess game of business, our chess game of life is a systemic game where every step or action leads to predictable actions and reactions. And so I think that as we consider systemic thinking, the big question for you, if you're still with us in this, is what are you going to do now? What are you going to do like now, today? Micro actions, minor actions, not tomorrow, not next week, but what might you be willing to do today? Might you be willing to pull out a piece of paper and write a couple of thoughts down? Might you be willing to print out that participant guide and read through it and at least start the process of rethinking something? Might you be willing to take micro actions today that are not going to change your life, but they might be just a little different? Like if we end this call and if you actually can take 5 or 10 minutes and just say to yourself, all right, while this is all still fresh in my head, I'm going to ask myself, what assumptions have I made? And I'm going to write those down. And then I'm going to use this journaling process to at least re-explore them. They might be correct. They might not be correct. There might be other options I haven't considered. But in your personal chess game, deciding right now you're going to make a couple of micro moves, that's where we start to make a difference. And of course, as we're looking at micro moves and actions, we have to balance risk and reward. I'm a big fan of low risk, high potential reward options, particularly if you think of reward, not just in terms of, hey, will it generate money? Hey, will it get me to my end goal? Part of the reward is also the learning. Every experiment that you try produces one positive outcome, which is learning. You try something and it doesn't work out. You try something and it blows up in your face. You have an idea that you might want to be. I'm going to just take something that's way out. If you've always wondered, could I be a stand-up comic? Because I love watching stand-up comics. So can I be a stand-up comic? I'd love to do that. I'd love that experiment. Okay, now I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you just go out willy-nilly, find an open mic night and try to. I would recommend you do a little preparation, possibly, but the risk, the risk is modest. The potential reward, even the learning could be huge. So I'm just saying you balance risk and reward. And I love the low risk, high potential reward micro actions, small actions that have little or no risk with potentially a great reward, particularly the learning kind of reward. And ultimately, you are the expert on you. And so you have to ask yourself, this is between you and you. This isn't you promising Dan something. Between you and you, what can you actually do? What can you commit to? Um, and I would say we're gonna end this in just a moment. In the moment after we end it, write something down. This is the smallest possible thing. Write something down, and that might begin a process of going forward in a slightly different direction, moving your chess game in a slightly different direction. With that, we are at the end of time, and I started with a promise to start on time and end on time, so I'm going to end on time. Thank you so much for this. The recording will be available, I'm sure, in the near future at Infopro Learning's website. So thank you to all of you. I really appreciate you staying engaged. And thank you, Peter. I appreciate the kind words. Without question, that's very nice. So thanks. We'll talk to you at some point in the future. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dan. It was really insightful. See you soon, everyone. Please take care.